Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. I thought he was honest. That was the very first thing I told my sister when she asked me about him. He just seems so genuine, I had said. You know, that rare kind of person you think you can lean on without question. His words had weight, but not the kind that dragged me down, more like the kind that grounded me. His voice always carried a steady calmness, like he had figured out the secrets of life and was willing to share just enough to make me feel safe. It all began on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and fallen leaves crunch under your shoes. I had gone to the community center for a local event, nothing fancy, just a gathering where neighbors shared food, laughter, and stories. He was there, standing a little off to the side, not in the center of things, but not hiding either. His presence had a quiet strength, like a tree standing tall in a field. We spoke first about something ordinary, a missing dish on the buffet table, I think. But within minutes, we were talking about life, about choices, about the way people often surprise you. I remember how his eyes lit up when he said, "I value honesty above all. The truth may hurt, but lies destroy." That stayed with me. It made me trust him more than I realized at the time. Over the following weeks, he kept showing up in places where I least expected him. At the library when I stopped by to pick up a book, at the grocery store when I was choosing apples, even at the coffee shop where I sometimes treated myself after work. At first, it felt like coincidence. But after a while, I started to wonder if it was something else. And yet, each time we talked, it felt natural, like we were old friends who hadn't spoken in years but somehow picked up right where we left off. The conversations weren't always deep. Sometimes it was as simple as talking about the weather or sharing which pie tasted best at the local bakery. But there was always this undercurrent, a thread that pulled me closer to him. I began to admire his way of speaking, clear, deliberate, never rushed. And when he smiled, there was a warmth that made me forget for a moment that the world can be harsh. One evening, I invited him to join a small group of friends at my home. Nothing big, just tea and conversation. He blended in easily, making everyone laugh with a story about his childhood and listening intently when others spoke. My friends whispered afterward, "He seems like such a good man." And I agreed. I thought I had finally found someone whose heart was as steady as his words, but as time went on, small cracks began to show. Nothing dramatic at first. He would say he was too busy to call back, though I later learned he had spent the evening out with acquaintances. He would recall stories differently than he had told them before, little details shifted just enough to make me pause. At first, I brushed it off. We all forget things, don't we? But then there were moments that unsettled me more deeply. One afternoon, we were walking through the park. The trees were dressed in their fiery reds and oranges, and children were playing with kites in the open field. He spoke about his past, about the hardships he had faced. His words painted him as a man who had endured more than most, someone who had fought through storms and come out wiser. But something in the way he avoided my eyes when he spoke left me unsettled. I couldn't explain why, but the weight of his words felt different that day, heavier, harder to carry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself replaying our conversations, noticing the moments where his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the stories that didn't quite add up. And for the first time, I felt a small seed of doubt. Still, I wanted to believe in him. He had shown me kindness, listened when I needed to talk, and reminded me that life still held surprises. Maybe I was overthinking, I told myself. Maybe my own fears were clouding my judgment. But deep down, a voice whispered that something wasn't as it seemed, and then, one evening, I saw it. The moment that changed everything. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just a glance, a flicker of expression when he thought no one was watching. But it was enough. In that instant, the honesty I thought I had found cracked open, and his true face, hidden beneath layers of charm and steady words, began to show. That I stood there, torn between disbelief and realization, my heart racing as though it knew before my mind could accept it. The man I thought I knew was not the man standing before me. And I wondered, how long had he been wearing that mask? That was the beginning of the shift, the moment I realized that the truth I valued so deeply might not have been the truth he carried within him. What followed tested not just my trust in him, but my trust in myself. Would you like me to continue with chapter 2, where I reveal what I actually discovered about him and how it changed the way I saw not only him, but myself? I couldn't shake the feeling after that moment in the park. It was as if the ground beneath me had shifted, but only slightly, just enough to make me question where I was standing. I wanted so badly to dismiss it, to believe the man I thought he was hadn't suddenly vanished in front of me. But I couldn't deny the way his face had hardened when he thought no one was watching, or how quickly the warmth disappeared from his eyes before he turned back to me with a practiced smile. The next few days were strange. He still called, still checked in with that same gentle tone, but I noticed myself listening differently. I paid attention to pauses, to the way he phrased things, to the silences between his words. Once, when he said he had spent the evening alone at home, I already knew it wasn't true. A neighbor had mentioned seeing him across town at a gathering. The realization sat heavy on my chest. He didn't need to lie about something so small. But he had. One evening, I decided to stop questioning myself and start looking for answers. I wasn't searching for drama. I just needed to know if the honesty I had believed in was real, or if I had been seeing only what I wanted to see. So when he invited me to meet him for coffee, I went with my heart open but my eyes wide. The cafe was quiet that night, filled with the soft hum of conversations and the clinking of cups against saucers. The lights cast a warm golden glow over the tables, and the air smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans. He greeted me with the same easy charm, pulling out my chair as though nothing in the world was out of place. But I watched closely. We talked about the usual things, how his week had gone, how the weather was changing, what books we were reading. But then I asked him about one of the stories he had told me weeks earlier, the one about his old job. I repeated it back to him exactly as he had shared it, waiting for him to smile at the memory. Instead, he hesitated, then told the story again, but differently. Whole pieces were rearranged, and details that had once been vivid were suddenly vague. I sat there, my tea growing cold in my hands, and felt a quiet ache rise in me. I wasn't angry yet. Just sad. Because it was becoming clear that the man who had spoken so passionately about valuing honesty above all else had been weaving something else entirely. Afterward, I walked home slowly, the autumn wind brushing against my cheeks. The streets were lined with fallen leaves that rustled as I moved, and the quiet gave me too much space to think. I asked myself why someone would create stories, why he would choose to shape his life into something that might not be real. Was it pride? Fear? Or was it simply a habit he couldn't break? But then came the night when everything shifted beyond doubt. He had invited me to join him at a small gathering, a dinner with people he said were old friends. I agreed, wanting to see him in another setting, to understand who he was when surrounded by those who truly knew him. The room was lively, filled with laughter and the smell of homemade food. People greeted him warmly, but not in the way I expected. They spoke to him with a familiarity that suggested a history far different from the one he had shared with me. They mentioned places he claimed never to have lived, work he had never admitted to doing, and even called him by a nickname I had never heard. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding. But as the evening went on, the puzzle pieces clicked into place, and I realized the stories he had told me were not fragments of his truth, they were fragments of something else. Something he had built carefully, piece by piece, like a wall between who he was and who he wanted me to believe he was. I didn't confront him then. I sat quietly, smiling when spoken to, all the while feeling my heart twist in my chest. By the time I returned home that night, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, asking myself what hurt more, that he had lied, or that I had believed in him so completely. The next morning, I made a choice. I would not accuse him in anger or run from the truth. I would ask him directly, not to shame him, but to understand. Because despite everything, I still wanted to know who he really was. When I finally asked him, his reaction told me more than his words. He looked at me with that same practiced smile, but his eyes betrayed something else, fear, maybe even regret. And for the first time, I realized the mask he wore was not only for me. It was for himself, too. What came next was not easy. His true face began to emerge, piece by piece, and with it came revelations that changed everything I thought I knew about him and about myself. Do you want me to continue with chapter 3, where the truth he revealed finally comes out? And I have to decide whether to walk away or see the man behind the mask for who he really is. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of quiet reflection and careful observation. I found myself thinking about him constantly, but not in the same way I had before. Before, it had been trust, admiration, even excitement. Now, it was a mixture of curiosity, caution, and a strange kind of sorrow. I wanted to understand him, not to accuse him. I wanted to see if the warmth I had felt, the connection, could survive the cracks I had discovered. One Sunday morning, I invited him over for tea. The light was soft through the curtains, a gentle glow on the wooden floor, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine from the small vase on my table. I had spent the morning preparing, not because I wanted to impress him, but because I needed a setting that felt honest, real, and grounded. Somewhere our conversation could happen without distractions, without masks. We sat across from each other, steam rising from our cups. I began gently, asking him about the stories I had noticed changing, about the details that didn't match up. He looked at me for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup, before he finally spoke. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. "I wanted you to see the best of me, the version of myself I wished I had always been. I didn't know how to show you the truth without risking everything you might think of me." His words struck me. There was no deflection, no charm. Just a man speaking quietly, honestly, or as honestly as he could. And in that moment, I realized that the mask wasn't about deception alone, it was about fear. Fear of being judged, fear of being rejected, fear of losing someone who had already begun to matter more than he could say aloud. We talked for hours that morning. About his past, about the choices that led him to shape his story differently, and about the truths he had been too afraid to share. He admitted mistakes, small and large, but he also revealed the things that had shaped him, the struggles, the loneliness, the moments where he had had to learn resilience the hard way. And with each confession, I felt a shift inside me. I remembered all the times I had felt his warmth, his attentiveness, his patience. I realized those moments hadn't been false. They had been genuine, just buried beneath layers of fear and caution. And in the telling of his truth, the man I thought I knew finally began to stand in front of me fully, without shadows. It wasn't perfect. There were still inconsistencies, still things that made me pause. But now, I could see him clearly, and that clarity was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. I began to understand that trust isn't about never being lied to, it's about the willingness to share your vulnerabilities, and about the courage to accept another person's vulnerabilities in return. By the end of our conversation, something shifted between us. Not in a dramatic, mover-like revelation, but quietly, almost imperceptibly. There was a deeper understanding, a mutual respect that felt solid, steady. I realized I had been holding on to an idealized version of honesty, forgetting that people are rarely completely transparent and that sometimes, what we see first is only a reflection of what someone hopes to be. After he left that day, I sat by the window for hours, watching the afternoon light change as it streamed through the trees. I thought about how fragile trust can be, how easily it can be shaken, and how resilient it can become when honesty is finally embraced. I felt a strange peace settle over me. Not because everything was perfect, but because the truth, however complex, however imperfect, was finally out in the open. It wasn't about forgiveness, exactly, nor was it about forgetting. It was about understanding. About seeing a human being fully, with all their flaws and strengths, and choosing whether that reality mattered more than the illusions we sometimes cling to. And in that moment, I realized it did. It mattered. The lessons I learned from him that morning were not just about him, they were about me. About how I perceive others, about how easily I could place someone on a pedestal without truly seeing them. About the courage it takes to face the real truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it shakes the foundation of what you thought you knew. I knew then that the next chapter, whatever it might be, would require courage too. Courage not just from him, but from me. To accept the truth fully, to navigate the choices it demanded, and to decide whether the bond we had built could survive the reality we now shared. You want me to continue with Chapter 4? The days that followed were quiet, almost contemplative. I found myself replaying every conversation, every glance, every word that had once felt effortless between us. There was no rush, no drama, just a gentle reckoning with the truth we had uncovered together. It was strange, almost liberating, to realize that the uncertainty I had feared could not hurt me the way I imagined. What mattered now was clarity, understanding, and choice. I met him again on a late afternoon, the sky painted with shades of amber and rose. The streets smelled faintly of rain, though the clouds had yet to break, and the world seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for the next moment to unfold. He was already there when I arrived, leaning slightly against the railing of the small bridge overlooking the river. The water below moved slowly, reflecting the colors of the sky, rippling gently like a memory. We didn't speak immediately. I watched him for a long time, noticing the way his shoulders carried both weight and ease, the subtle tension that suggested he was as nervous as I was. When he finally looked at me, there was honesty in his gaze, raw, unfiltered. No masks, no rehearsed lines. Just him. "I've thought a lot about everything," he said quietly. "About why I hid things, and about what it means to truly be seen. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you can understand that it came from fear, not malice." I nodded, feeling a tightness in my chest that was equal parts empathy and realization. "I understand," I said. "But understanding doesn't erase the past. What matters is what comes next." We talked for hours, walking along the riverbank, sharing the small, ordinary details of our lives while also exploring the larger questions. There were moments of silence, comfortable and reflective, where we simply let the air hold our thoughts. In those moments, I realized that connection isn't about perfection. It's about presence. About showing up, even when the truth is messy, even when it challenges the way you've seen someone or yourself. As night fell, the street lamps flickered on, casting soft golden pools of light on the pavement. The river shimmered beneath them, like liquid memory. And in that quiet, I made a decision, not about whether to stay or leave, not about trust or betrayal, but about perspective. I would choose to see him fully, as he was, and in doing so, I chose to see myself more clearly as well. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't instantaneous. Trust is not rebuilt in a day, and honesty is not always simple. But as I walked home that evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known before. The tension that had been living in my chest loosened, replaced by a quiet resolve. I realized that life is not about perfect people or flawless stories. It's about the courage to face reality, to embrace complexity, and to allow growth to come from even the most unexpected revelations. Over the following weeks, our relationship evolved. There was patience, slow rebuilding, and small gestures that spoke louder than words. We laughed more freely, argued more openly, and shared moments of genuine connection without the burden of pretense. And through it all, I discovered that the man I thought I knew had always been capable of goodness, empathy, and understanding. It just required the courage to show it. Looking back now, I understand that the moment I saw his true face was not the end of something, but the beginning of a deeper understanding. I learned that honesty is not just about facts, it's about intent, courage, and willingness to be vulnerable. And I learned that we, as human beings, are not defined by our mistakes or the masks we